Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover the Anabasis by the Greek historian Xenophon. This is from Book 18 from my 2025 reading list. Well, Anabasis is a word that means a movement upwards, and what's interesting is that it can refer both to an advance and a retreat, and both of those occur in this work. This is a first-hand account of a battle and then a retreat by what are called the 10,000, referring to Greek mercenaries who took part in a battle where they joined Cyrus the Younger, the Persian, in an attempt to claim the throne of Persia. It didn't work, and they had to retreat back home, and the entire time this took was around 14 months, and it covered 3,200 miles. I thought a lot about the Iliad and the Odyssey while reading through this work because the Iliad is going towards a battle, just like these Greek mercenaries were going towards the battle in Persia. And then the Odyssey is the return home from that battle. And same thing, you've got this return. These soldiers have to return. They've got to go mostly by land and then a little bit by sea, and they battle plenty of things on the way back during this retreat. It takes place in modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, and the battle was in Kunaksu, and then the retreat went back through Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, what we know of as those countries today. So this work is made up of 6 books. In book 1, you have the march up into the country from Sardis to Babylonia, and then you've got that battle. And then from books 2 to 4, you've got the retreat of these Greek mercenaries, of these 10,000 back to the Black Sea. And then in books 5 and 6, you've got a march along the sea, but then also some sea voyages that go along that Black Sea coast there, and they're going west at that point, and they're making their way back towards Greece. So we leave them off to where they're not back in Greece at the end of this book, but that they're headed in that direction. The timeline, I want to talk about the timeline first in relation to Hellenica. So Hellenica is another book by Xenophon, and that one covers events that took place between 411 and 362 BC. So that book takes off right where Thucydides ends his work, and so Hellenica takes it right from there. The time frame of the events that Anabasis covers is from 401 to 399 BC. So it's actually within the time frame of the Hellenica, but this goes into great deal about those few years there. When Xenophon actually wrote this, it was between 370 and 360 BC. So we're looking at like 30 to 40 years after the events had actually taken place. Xenophon, the author of this work, is actually a main character in it as well. And what's interesting is he writes it in the third person. So he said, Xenophon did this, Xenophon did that. So he never uses the first person, which is really interesting. There's a reason for that. The version I read, I'll highlight that in a minute, but there's a number of appendices. And in one of the appendices, they said the reason that you would do that is to avoid the odium of praising himself, a fear all Greeks had. So that's the reason that he used this third person. He was an ambitious young soldier, but one thing I learned that I didn't know before that I just found fascinating, he was an associate of Socrates, the great philosopher. And so he talks about that a little bit. He actually asks Socrates for his advice on should he go on this excursion with a Persian. The history between Greece and Persia was not a friendly one, and so Xenophon's wondering here: should I associate with this? Should I go? And Socrates gives him advice, and Xenophon interestingly doesn't take it exactly, but Xenophon was both a friend and a student of Socrates, and he's one of the people that wrote about Socrates as well in some other works, and then a little bit in this work. In the introduction by Shane Brennan in the version I read, he said that Xenophon was interested in a few things specifically that show up throughout this book, and those were ethics and the problem of how to rule. And so you see this come up over and over in this work. Xenophon was later in life, he was exiled, and he spent most of his life, the rest of his life, outside of Athens. And again, he was partnering with the Persians and had done some other things, kind of joining the oligarchs and at different points in history with Athens. And so he was exiled, but he ended up writing a lot of his works in exile. He ended up writing 14 different works. And I'm reading the third one now, and I'll stop there, but I've read Hellenica, this Anabasis, and then I'm reading now the Education of Cyrus. And this would be a different Cyrus than the one that shows up in this work. We're talking in this work about Cyrus the Younger, but the Education of Cyrus book talks about Cyrus the Great. Now, the version I read was the Landmark Xenophon Anabasis, and the intro is by Shane Brennan. This is those Landmark series, these huge books. They contain tons of maps and side margin notes, and they are so good. I've read Herodotus now. I've read Thucydides, and then Hellenica by Xenophon, and then this is my fourth Landmark edition. If there's a Landmark edition of a history book that you want to read from the past, please use that version. They are so good. They're so thorough. There are there's 23 appendices in the back of this one. I read through some of those, and they're so interesting, and they help understand what's going on in this work. The introductions are incredible, but yeah, just the footnotes on every page, the maps. Like if you're reading about a particular area, there will be a map about it. They'll show some things they've recovered, whether it's helmets or weapons or that kind of thing. So it's just a very helpful tool while you're reading a book of this magnitude and just of all the different places that are discussed. The book was edited by Shane Brennan and David Thomas, and then the series editor for all of these is Robert B. Strassler. So for the rest of this episode, I'm going to have 4 segments in this episode. I usually just do 3, but I want to cover quite a few different things in this one. So in the next segment, I want to cover the story of what takes place in the Anabasis. And then in segment 3, I want to highlight what stuck out. And then in segment 4, the one thing that I always hope to remember from this work. All right, so here's the story that takes place in Anabasis. It's about the 10,000 Greek mercenaries, and they're called Syrians. And they're called Syrians because they followed Cyrus. And so the entire account begins in media res, kind of like the Iliad, where it just... You don't start at the very beginning of like how all this happened. You don't even like the Greeks are already in Persia by the time it starts. So you're not getting like from Greeks starting from Greece and working their way over. So you're kind of in the middle of the story, and the very first lines tell the story about the Persian leadership. And so we start by learning about Darius and Persiades, and so Darius is the king, and then Persiades is his wife. They have 2 sons, Artaxerxes and Cyrus. Artaxerxes ascends the throne, and then he mistreats Cyrus, and Cyrus vows revenge. But Cyrus is off in other parts of the kingdom, and he kind of secretly starts to collect a group of Greek mercenaries and others to help him go and battle his brother and ascend the throne. He's gathering these Greek mercenaries, but he's not telling them exactly what they're going to be doing. So it's under false pretenses, but they eventually become apparent, and everyone starts to realize, oh, okay, we are headed towards the heart of Persia, and we are going to battle the king. So when they get to that battle, the Battle of Cunaxa, Cyrus is killed in that battle. And I want to read parts of that because it's a really interesting battle, and then just what happens. So this is on page 41 of the book. Calling out, "I see the man." So the man here is the king. "He rushed at the king and struck him in the chest." And that's Cyrus, who sees the king. He rushes towards the king, who's his brother, and strikes him in the chest, wounding him through his breastplate, as Ctesias the physician says. And he also says that he himself treated the wound. Someone threw a light spear with great force at Cyrus just as he struck the king, hitting Cyrus under the eye. And from the point, the king and Cyrus and the respective entourages were all fighting together. Many of the king's entourage were killed, is stated by Stesius, who was with the king on the other side. Cyrus himself was killed, and the best 8 of his supporters lay dead upon his corpse, end quote. So there you get a pretty intense battle scene there where Cyrus actually sees his brother, runs up to his brother, strikes him in the chest, but it's not a kill wound, so his brother lives. But while he's doing that, someone throws a spear. It hits Cyrus right below the eye. That kills him, and so Cyrus is dead. And now you've got these Greek soldiers who have followed Cyrus to Persia for this purpose, and their leader is dead. And it's really interesting. Right after this takes place, most of the Greek army is in a different location from where Cyrus is killed, and they don't know for a while that Cyrus has been killed. But in their part of the battle, they're actually doing very well. And so, from everything they know, they're winning. They're doing great. And it's only later that they find out that Cyrus, who has led them here, who has been the one they've been looking to, has been killed. Well, pretty soon after that, some Greek generals get captured and they get killed and cruelly killed. The Persians, some of the other stuff I've read about how Persians would kill people are just spine tingling. Like I don't even like to think about them. This book didn't really go into that, but there's kind of hints that probably not a pleasant death. But what this does is open up an opportunity for Xenophon, the author of this work, to become a leader of the Greeks as they retreat back, as they head back towards Greece. So they wind their way back towards Greece. It takes a long time. They're going through all sorts of weather. They're meeting people from different cultures. They're having all these experiences. It's super fascinating. I'm going to cover some of those things in the next segment. But by the time the book ends, they are still a long ways away from getting home. But there's just this strong desire to get back home. Some of these men have families and kids they haven't seen for a while, and they want to get back home. So they're called the 10,000 Greek mercenaries. It was not 10,000. It was actually around 12,900 when they started. After some of the battles and after they did the retreat, and a lot of people got lost in some of the weather with snow and freezing to death and that kind of thing. By the time they get back to the Black Sea, they have 8,600 of those original 12,900 people. And then by the end of the book, they're closer to around 5,000. So they lose quite a few people. Some people kind of ran off as well, but the majority of those died from battle or from weather. And so 10,000 is just kind of a even number that people use when they're talking about the 10,000 Greeks, or when they're talking about the Greek mercenaries that took part in this. But they went through a lot. There was a ton of endurance that they had to go through. And so I wanted to read 2 different parts. One is on page 200, where it says why the Greeks went. And here is what Xenophon says about that. Most of the soldiers were not the kind of people who, in need of a livelihood, have sailed overseas for the pay, but they had done so on hearing of the personal merits of Cyrus. Some actually brought other men with them, and others had even spent their own money. Beyond these, there were yet others who had run away from their fathers and mothers, and some, hearing that people in Cyrus's following were doing very well, had left children behind, intending to come back when they had acquired money to spend on them. These being the kinds of people they longed to get safely back to Greece. End quote. So you see there just a number of different reasons that people were attracted to this and why they made their way over to Greece. Now I want to say from the other side of things, this is what Cyrus says, and this is why he says he chose the Greeks instead of just getting a bunch of Persians or people nearer to where he was. So he says this: "Men of Greece, it is not because I lack people to enroll in my army that I'm bringing you along here to be my allies in battle, but because I think that you are better and more effective than even a large number of barbarians. That was the reason that I took you on. So make sure that you are men worthy of the freedom that you possess, and because of which I count you as happy. You may be certain that I would choose freedom rather than all I have and much more besides. I know the sort of battle you are going into, and I will teach you so that you may know too. And I'll stop reading there, but I just found it interesting why Cyrus said that. The reason I took you on is I think you are better and more effective than even a large number of barbarians. And so that was Cyrus's reason for going after these soldiers. These Greek mercenaries. So in the next segment here, I want to talk about some of the cultures that the Greeks experienced along the way, and especially along their retreat. I want to talk about some mad honey, some frostbite clowns, and omens. And so get ready for that in segment 3 here. Here are some of the things that stuck out to me in the Anabasis. It had somewhat of a similar feel to Herodotus. I loved when I read Herodotus because he was going all around to these different people groups and people that he was experiencing for the first time, and he's telling you things that are just wild, like that he's encountering, and I found that to be quite delightful. And so there are some similar parts in this work where the Greeks are encountering these people groups that are just they just do everything the exact opposite of how the Greeks do things, and it was just really interesting to read about them. So I wanted to first talk about the Masioneski people, and these were along the retreat where the Greeks are heading back home. They come across these Masioneki people, and this is what Xenophon said about them. These were the most barbarous people and the furthest removed from Greek customs, for when they were in a crowd, they did whatever others might do in solitude, and when they were by themselves, they behaved just as if they were in the company of others. They would talk to themselves and laugh at themselves and stand and dance wherever they happened to be, as if showing off to other people. End quote. In another part, they talk about those people, like they would make love just in the field in front of everybody. And so when he's saying they would do what other people would do in solitude, they would do it in a crowd, but then what other people would do in a crowd, they would do by themselves. It's just interesting to read about those people. Now we get into mad honey. So I want to read some different parts here of things they encountered. And though there was nothing else that all surprised them, there were many swarms of bees thereabouts, and all of the soldiers who ate the honeycombs began to behave crazily, started to vomit, and were subject to diarrhea, and none of them could stand up straight. Those who had eaten only a little seemed like people who were extremely drunk, but those who had eaten a lot appeared to be mad, or even to be dying. Many lay on the ground in this state as if they had been routed by an enemy, and there was much despondency. But on the following day nobody had died, and round about the same time of day they recovered their senses. And on the third day, or in some cases on the fourth, they got up just as if it had been an enchanted potion that they had been drinking. End quote. And so and there are some good footnotes here, and they said that if bees eat from a certain flower that is poisonous, it can have this effect. But these men had this honey, and some of them went mad, but then after a few days they were okay again. So they call that the mad honey. Next was just frostbite, and this just one of the terrible things about war and travel and all that during this time. Following them came a band of the enemy, making off with those draft animals that were unable to go farther and fighting with each other over them. Soldiers fell behind if they had become snowblind or had their toes rot off their feet through frostbite. But a soldier could protect his eyes from the snow glare if he kept something dark in front of him as he made his way, and he could protect his feet if he kept moving, never had a rest, and took his shoes off at night. Those who slept with them still strapped up found that the leather straps bit into their feet and the shoes froze onto their flesh all around. This happened because these were primitive shoes made out of freshly flayed oxhide, since their old footwear had worn out. End quote. So just the difficult things of this retreat back home. There's just this wonderful scene where they finally get to the Black Sea, and let me read here. So it seemed to Xenophon that it was something really important. In mounting his horse and taking Lycos and the cavalry with him, he went to help. Taking myself out of the quote, he Xenophon had started hearing this noise, and he's like, what is going on? Why are people screaming? So he goes up to this noise, and then I'll continue. Very quickly, they heard the soldiers shouting, "The sea, the sea," and repeating it from one to the other like a watchword. Then naturally, all the rear guards started to run too, and the draft animals were urged on, as well as the horses. When they all reached the summit, then and there they embraced each other, and generals and captains too, with tears in their eyes. Someone passed the word, and all of a sudden the soldiers began bringing stones and making a great cairn. End quote. So this is the first time they've seen the sea in a long time, and they see it, and they just rejoice. And the Greek words for that are either thalassa or thalata, and apparently that shows up in a number of works later on that quote that, just this idea of after enduring so much, seeing the sea, but knowing that you're getting closer to home. There's hope. Let me read about a banquet they have with some people they come across. This is really funny. So after this, people came in blowing on horns, such as they use for giving signals, and on wind instruments made of raw oxhide, trumpeting tunes with split octave notes. At this, Socrates himself stood up, raised a loud war cry, and leapt from his place very nimbly, as if avoiding a missile. Then clowns came in. End quote. So it's just, it was so funny to come across that. Like they're having this nice banquet dinner, and then the leader of that group, he stands up, raises a large war cry, leaps from his place very nimbly, as if avoiding a missile, and then the clowns come in. So you just imagine some great fun along the way as well. One thing that really stuck out to me was the omens, and we see this throughout Greek literature, but leaders would seek the advice from the gods. They would seek word from the gods on what they should do next. And as Xenophon becomes one of the leaders, he starts doing this. And I don't know, I always kind of have the thought, like, did they just manipulate this? Like they had something in mind they wanted to do, and then they would just, offer a sacrifice and then look for certain signs to tell them something or other. And, could they kind of manipulate that, or did they really believe it and that kind of thing? But with Xenophon, you really see that he took it seriously. And so there's one instance where it says this, but the God gave him a clear signs neither to seek the command nor to accept it if he was chosen. So here in this one, he's not able to do either option. And so that was interesting. But then there's another section just like 10 pages later where Xenophon is seeking an omen, and he says this: "Men, you can see that the sacred signs are not yet forthcoming in favor of our journey, and I can see that you are in need of food supplies, so I think it necessary to offer a sacrifice to inquire about that in particular." End quote. This comes after numerous attempts to get a certain sign from the gods on whether to move forward, what to do next, and it keeps coming back with no answer. And I just found that so interesting, because you see here that the soldiers are getting to the point where they're running out of food. And so, like, hey, Xenophon, we need an answer here. We need to know what to do. We're running out of food. But he's not getting an answer. And that just kind of told me that he respected the gods enough to not go forward if there wasn't a clear sign that he was supposed to go forward. And so that just stuck out to me as well. The other thing that, in the last thing here for this segment is that the things they ran into on the way home, on the retreat. So after this battle where Cyrus has been killed, after their generals have been taken, they experience worse fighting during the retreat than they did at that battle. And it's just a really interesting thing to think about, a hard thing to think about in that of all that they had to endure. You think, they travel all this way for this battle. This battle takes place. It's brutal. And, but that's just the start of it. Like they had to get home. They had to go through different people groups. They Some of the people groups would set up a market where they could shop. Other ones would kind of enclose themselves within their city walls. They didn't want anything to do with the Greeks. And so you just had all these different situations. Sometimes the Greeks would purchase the food from that market. Other times they would attack the towns to get supplies. And so you just see a whole variety of things, but there's a lot of suffering on that retreat home. Well, in the next segment here, the final segment, I will cover the one thing that really stuck out to me the most in Anabasis by Xenophon. Well, the thing that's struck me the most in reading Anabasis and then reading the introduction and some of the appendices was that Xenophon was a friend and a student of Socrates. And so I didn't know that going in. So you've got this incredible story of these Greek mercenaries going to Persia, fighting in this battle, going home through all these just terrible things and losing people along the way. And it's just an amazing story. But the fact that Xenophon was a friend and student of Socrates, it plays into this story. And Socrates was well known, especially from Plato's Republic, in desiring not just anyone that gets voted in to rule, but he wanted the wise people. He wanted certain people to rule, and kind of the philosopher king idea. And so there's an element of this work that Xenophon is this ideal leader, and this is perhaps an attempt by Xenophon himself as the author to influence us in the way that we think about him, and perhaps for us to think about him in that way. There's an appendix by Robin Waterfield, and he says this: "It is not far-fetched then to suggest that we are supposed to see Xenophon throughout Anabasis as a Socratic leader in action." End quote. This is the time of the sophists. Actually, this is past the time of them in Athens. We come across them in some of the Greek tragedies and some of the Greek comedies. But just these and the sophists were known. One of the negative things they were known for was that they could argue any side of a issue, and so they, just by their arguments, they could get you to act a certain way or believe a certain thing, whether it was right or wrong. And so it kind of went beyond this saying the right thing, but saying the thing that would get you what you wanted. And so with democracy, with rule by law, with all these things, there is a necessary art of persuasion. And so perhaps Xenophon was the embodiment of this leader that Socrates had hoped for, because Xenophon has all sorts of situations in the Anabasis, and as the leader, he could rule by force. He say, I'm in charge. You soldiers will do what I say, and if you don't, you will get punished, or we won't make it home, and all these kind of things. But he goes about, and there's just speech after speech in this work where Xenophon is attempting to persuade his soldiers, his men, and he's looking for wisdom. He's trying to rule in a good way, and so, but using that art of persuasion and kind of taking what's going on in Athens at that time and utilizing it and using it for these battles and that kind of thing. I want to read one other part from the introduction, and then I want to read some of Xenophon's the things he said in speeches. So here's from the introduction. An element of Xenophon's background that is sometimes underappreciated is the influence of the Athenian political system. Up to the end of the Peloponnesian War, except for a short interval in 411, Athens remained a direct democracy in which adult male citizens gathered in assembly and voted on motions after listening to arguments from all sides. The ability to present cases for or against motions to a popular audience was thus a critical ingredient of political effectiveness, and the most accomplished speakers were often the most powerful politicians. And then a little bit more here. Xenophon, as leader of the 10,000, skillfully employs democratic methods in his political arena, the army as an assembly. He speaks persuasively, and his initial address to fellow officers leads to a speech to a full embassy of the assembly of the army. And I'll stop reading there, but just again, you get that idea that that Xenophon, as a student of Socrates, was an effective speaker and a persuader. And so you see the influence of Socrates even in this. It wasn't just that Socrates was helping people be good philosophers, but he was helping in areas like this where generals could persuade their men in battle. There's one speech that Xenophon gives in this work that was just incredible. And there's 2 pages of content. I'm just going to kind of skip around to different parts here on things that he says. So here's the first one. The soldiers here all have their gaze fixed on you. Here Xenophon is speaking to the other leaders. And if they see you being faint-hearted, they will all be cowardly. But if you show yourselves to be making preparations against the enemy and you summon the others to join you, there's no doubt about it. They will follow you and try to imitate you. There's another part talking about order. For without leaders, nothing either honorable or beneficial could be accomplished anywhere at all. To put it bluntly, and in warfare, this is particularly true. Good order, it seems, saves people, while lack of order has already destroyed many. Here's another one on focus. But if anyone turns the soldiers' minds from merely brooding on what they are going to suffer and instead gets them to concentrate on what they are going to do, they will be much more stout-hearted. And then the final one here is the question of what brings victory in war. And Xenophon contrasts a couple approaches here. So let me read. This is a little longer, about a paragraph, but this is so good. You know, of course, that it is neither numbers nor brute force that brings victories in war. Instead, whichever army, backed by the gods, advances against the enemy in the more vigorous spirit finds that their opponents do not generally wait to receive their charge. I myself, man, have taken to heart that in war, those who cast about by every means they can to remain alive are precisely those who generally meet a bad and shameful end. By contrast, I see those who have learned that death is common to all and unavoidable for human beings, and who compete for the prize of an honorable death, are the ones who somehow or other reach old age and enjoy a happier existence as long as they live. End quote. So again, you just, like, even in this, you see the art of persuasion, but you see some philosophy in there as well, some kind of deep thinking for giving a speech to a bunch of soldiers. And so, that's my one thing. It's just that Xenophon, being a friend and student of Socrates, that ends up playing a role in the Anabasis here. Probably wouldn't have the Anabasis just in terms of the writing as well had Xenophon not been a student of Socrates. But then just even how Xenophon conducts himself is a result of Socrates. One thing that I found interesting in one of the appendices of this book, and especially after just having read some of Aristophanes' comedies, is that there are 3 main people who wrote about Socrates, and they are Aristophanes, Plato, and Xenophon here. I've not read Plato yet. Plato's coming up, but I have read Aristophanes, and his Clouds play is about Socrates, but it kind of takes like a bunch of people and uses the name of Socrates to talk about how different people are teaching, but Socrates ends up being kind of the main point person, and Socrates was probably at that play. So of these 3 people that wrote about Socrates, Aristophanes was the only one who was a contemporary writer, who was alive when Socrates was alive, and not only that, but wrote about him while he was alive. For both Plato and Xenophon, they were obviously alive for part of the time that Socrates was alive, but when they wrote about him, it was after he had been killed or been required to drink hemlock. So it's interesting to me that Aristophanes, the comedy writer, is the one that the only one that wrote about Socrates while he was alive, but it's not like a true picture of him. And then there's question if the pictures that Xenophon and Plato give of Socrates are true to character as well. So just because they're later past, and maybe there's kind of some revision that takes place there. But that was all just interesting. Let me take one just quick step back along these lines too as well, and talk about kind of the Greek histories in general. And what I found to be very interesting in the ones that I've read so far, and specifically with Thucydides, and then here with Xenophon and the Anabasis, is that the histories they're almost a working out of Greek thought in realpolitik, in real time, and in battle. And so especially with Thucydides, you're seeing this idea of can we do things by persuasion, or does it have to be by force? Because there, in so much of the Greek tragedies, there's this idea that the barbarians are the people of force. They just use force to get things done. But we Athenians, we debate, we talk things through, we figure things out, and we do it peacefully and all that. And yet you come to these battles, and do the Greeks sit there and try to persuade the enemy? No, they just go out brute force and kill them oftentimes. So you've got these kind of great grand philosophical ideas of how they want things to run, and to some extent how they do run in Athens. But then you've got the real politics side of things. You've got the battle in wars, and the stated values don't oftentimes translate in these extreme situations. Similar in Anabasis here, where this one is talking more about persuasion in that as well. But here you do have elements of that, of what's going on in Athens, of people learning the art of persuasion, and that being a big thing. And you do see Xenophon actually taking that on to some degree here as well. So I think that's really interesting, in a good argument, I guess, for reading all of these things together, to read the tragedies, to read Homer, to read the histories, to read a variety of different things together, because you see ideals, you see how they're actually worked out in more historical accounts, and it just makes for some really fascinating reading. So in conclusion, this was an action-packed book, a really amazing story. Back in March of this year, Elon Musk actually tweeted that he was listening to the Anabasis, and 46,000 people liked that tweet. At the bookstore where I'm business manager, Landmark Booksellers, we sold out of the book. This Landmark edition that I mentioned is almost impossible to get right now, and so you can get the Oxford World's Classic. Hopefully they're reprinting this book. I'm glad I got mine. I bought mine a couple of years ago, so I had it already, but it is really hard to get right now. And I think part of the reason is because of that tweet, and just that that got some people interested in learning more about this book. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. But if it's something about Xenophon or the Anabasis, please put a comment in on Substack for this podcast episode, because then other people can see that. We can get a conversation going. So I'm currently reading The Education of Cyrus by Xenophon. So that'll be my last work by Xenophon. And I'm closing out here. I'm closing out with my Immortal books. I'm closing out the Greek tragedies, the Greek comedies, and now the Greek histories. And that will be all for those categories of things, of Greek works. When I go back to the when I go back to the Immortal books later this year, I'm going to be starting with the Greek philosophers, and that will be my first entry into Greek philosophy, and be starting with Plato and then getting into Aristotle. So I'm really excited about that. I'm a little nervous. Never one for the philosophy works in college. Those always kind of scared me. So I'll be diving into the Greek philosophy coming up next. But immediately next is the month of July, and July is my summer break. So I divide each year, my reading year, into the first 2 months of each year. I just read through a different version of the Bible, just something I personally want to do. And so I just start in Genesis, read to Revelation. And then in March through June, I read through the Immortal books, and I'm reading those in chronological order. I think it'll probably take 15 years total for the list of 200 authors that I'm going through. And so I'm in year 3 of that process. Then in July, I do a summer break. In August through November, I go back to the Immortal books for fall semester. And then in winter, in December, I do a winter break. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, and the website is stock full of resources to help you find books, create your own reading list, see what I thought about books and all that. I will be back next week. I'll probably be discussing The Education of Cyrus by Xenophon, and then after that, I'll start talking about some of the to-be-read book piles that has grown, and I'll be selecting from that for my July book. So I'm really looking forward to that. I've got a huge pile over here, and probably will only get to like 4 or 5 of them during July, but I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next week. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.